I don't believe men were created to be pawns in someone else's game. I believe we were created to be steward kings. Men under authority, yes, but entrusted with real responsibility. Not perfect men, but disciplined ones. Men who rule themselves, serve God directly, and refuse to live in fear. This is king, not pawn. Most men today are trying to become something, stronger, more respected, more successful, more attractive. And honestly, there's nothing wrong with that. But somewhere along the way, we've confused loudness with strength, aggression with leadership, and attention or validation with value. And I think we've kind of lost sight of something a little bit quieter, but far more powerful once you hear it. And this is the kind of man that God actually forms. Blessed are the men who know they need God. The world tells you to be self-sufficient. Okay, figure it out on your own, depend on no one, be your own authority. But the strongest men eventually realize something. I don't fully have this figured out. And it's not in a form of weakness, it's in clarity. I say this because the man who knows he needs God is the man who can actually be led. Blessed are the men who feel conviction. See, most men, they try to avoid discomfort. They distract themselves from it, they numb it. But conviction is not something to run from. Okay, it's something to listen to. That feeling when you know something's off, that quiet voice telling you to just adjust, that's not condemnation. Okay, that is direction. And the man who listens to it will not stay lost for long. Because here's the thing, there's a quiet realization that we all have as men. Usually when we're alone, there's no noise, no distraction, just a realization by itself. And it's typically that something that looks like I'm not where I'm supposed to be. And that moment can either lead to shame or to change. The man who leans into it begins to grow. Blessed are the men who stay grounded. The world rewards reaction, I should say. Quick opinions, fast responses, constant noise. But grounded men move differently. They listen more than they speak. They observe before they react. They don't get pulled into every single argument. Their strength is not in how loud they are, it is in how steady they remain. Blessed are the men who choose discipline. Discipline is not flashy. Okay, no one applauds the early mornings, no one celebrates restraint, no one sees the quiet decisions you make, but those decisions build something. A man who chooses discipline gains clarity, he gains confidence, gains self-respect. And it's not something that happens overnight, but it's something that does happen over the course of time. Blessed are the men who treat others well. You don't need to dominate every room, okay? You don't even need to win every single interaction. Real strength is shown in how you treat people who can't offer you anything in return. Respect, patience, kindness. Not because they deserve it, but because it reflects who you are. And honestly, there's something strong about a man who doesn't really need to prove himself. He doesn't interrupt, he doesn't overtalk, doesn't try to control the room. But that same man, when he does eventually speak, people listen because his presence, it carries weight, not from ego, but from alignment. Blessed are the men who seek what's right. Not what's popular, not what's easy, not what keeps them liked by everybody around them, but what is right. Even when it costs them something, even when it's uncomfortable, because over time, a man who consistently chooses what's right becomes someone others can trust. Blessed are the men who stay pure and private. See, what you do when no one else sees matters. Your habits, your thoughts, your decisions, not for image, but for integrity. Because a man who lives two different lives will eventually collapse under that weight. But a man who is consistent is stable. Blessed are the men who bring peace. The world is loud. It's divided, it's reactive, constantly arguing. But some men bring something different. They don't escalate, they don't inflame, they bring clarity, they bring calm, they bring order. And in a chaotic world that we live in, that kind of man becomes rare. Blessed are the men who stand anyway. There will be moments where standing alone costs you. It's going to cost you approval. It's going to cost you comfort and opportunity. But the man who stands when it matters builds something inside of himself. Conviction. And conviction is not loud, but it is unshakable. And here's the thing. There's something about a man who just walks it out. He doesn't announce it. He doesn't perform it. He just lives it. Day by day, quietly aligned, not perfect, but consistent. And over time, his life begins to speak for itself. See, this isn't about perfection. This is not a list to perform. This is a direction to walk. You will fall at times. You will misstep. You will fall short. The goal is not perfection. It is just alignment. Returning again and again to the man that God is forming you to be. Because you don't need to become louder. You don't need to become harder. You don't need to become someone else entirely. You just need to become aligned with truth, with discipline, with God. Okay? Be the kind of man who doesn't just talk about strength, but lives it quietly. Because in a world full of chasing noise, the man who walks in quiet alignment will stand out without ever needing to prove it.